everybody, this is Brandy from the California Department of Education. If you are here to learn about teacher librarian reporting and statutory requirements, you are in the right place. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a little bit of housekeeping information. So you may have noticed that this is not a two-way audio setting, so we cannot hear you. But if you would kindly type all of your questions in the question and answer or the Q&A box, we will be happy to answer those questions at the end of each of the sections, and each of the presenters will have an opportunity to take questions at that time. We will provide this PowerPoint to all of the attendees once the webinar is over, so make sure you log in. We'll have your email information, and we will email you a copy of the PowerPoint. Additionally, we are going to have this webinar transcribed, and we anticipate that it will be posted on either the California School Library Association's website or the CDE's website and possibly the CTC's website. So that is forthcoming. Again, you are all muted, so please respond to the Q&A box if you have specific questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Renee Owsley-Swank, and she's going to give you a little bit of an introduction.
All right. Good morning. As Brandy said, my name is Renee Owsley-Swank, and I'm the School Library Technology Consultant at the California Department of Education. And I want to thank you for joining us today for this joint training on how to accurately report teacher librarians and the guiding statutory regulations. This training has been in development for over a year, and two factors impressed upon us the need to offer such a training. First, the significant drop in the number of teacher librarians being reported. 859 teacher librarians were reported in the 2014-15 school year, and dropped to 152 reported in the 2015-2016 school year, a reduction of just over 82%. And the second point is that recommendations from the California State Auditor's Report on School Library Services in California. Among the recommendations were to educate districts on the changes in how teacher librarians are counted and to provide training on how to report teacher librarians. This is why we are here today. And before I move into our agenda and begin our training, I want to mention one other audit recommendation that directly impacts school districts, and that is the annual school library survey. Education Code 18122 directs school districts to report to the State Department of Education on the condition of their school libraries and will utilize an online survey to fulfill this law. While this training does not address the school library survey, we want to make you aware of a newly revised survey which will be distributed to districts by the end of January, and ask you to share the survey with the appropriate staff to complete the survey. And now, here's our agenda for the day. As advertised, this is a collaborative effort drawing upon experts from a variety of agencies, and I want to introduce our experts in the agenda item that they will be addressing. For the background, I will be partnering with Glenn Warren. He is the Encinitas Union School District Educational Services Director of Literacies, Outreach, and Libraries. The acronym is LOL, and once you get to know Glenn, you'll understand why that acronym fits. He's also the Vice President of Government Relations of the California School Library Association and the Chair of the Q Library Media Educator Network. We will be giving you a brief overview of the services teacher librarians provide and how that differs from classified library staff. Also joining us is to speak about credentialing are Aaron Schoolbull from the Certification Division and Hart Boyd, Professional Services Division, both from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. Brandy Howdigan, Senior Information Systems Analyst, CalPAD, CBEDS, and CDS Operations Office Lead Business Analyst for the CalPADS data system since 2006, will be taking us through the history of reporting teacher librarians, or the why, what the current data shows, and she will also explain in detail how to report teacher librarians in CalPADS. And finally, also joining us is Martha Friedrich, Client Services Director, California School Information Services, and she is here to provide support and is available to answer any questions about data entry or the CalPADS user interface. So there's a wealth of knowledge in this room, and without further ado, I turn the training over to Glenn Warren.
Well, thank you, Renee. It's great to be here with all of you this morning or this afternoon because it's potentially recorded and you're hearing it some other time. I want to give you a little bit of background about teacher librarians, why teacher librarians are important. I want to start off simply by saying nobody hates libraries. They love libraries. In fact, Starbucks, I think, modeled their entire pattern after making it feel like a library. So we're obviously on territory with a subject that brings everybody together. But there's so much misunderstanding, deep misunderstanding, deeply rooted misunderstanding about what a teacher librarian is. And before I even jump into that, I think it's very important to understand the messages in the title. These are teachers. These are credentialed teachers, clear credentialed teachers, good teachers that also got an additional aspect of education on top of that credential, which is library science. You know, things like, vetting resources, discerning between fake news, not plagiarizing, provide citations, things that make the news every single day and things that our students desperately need. Well, anyway, first of all, they're teachers first, as I said, and they provide personal learning environments. The library is the student's classroom, where the student gets to come in and decide what they want to read, what they want to learn, what they want to know. That's so critically important, especially now. And it's not just books. It's, we're talking about everything from books to vetted databases, and now OERs, open educational resources. And if you've done any diving into that area, you will know that that is an area that desperately needs curation and vetting. So again, once again, having somebody with that expertise that the standard teaching credential does not provide. But a teacher librarian that has that expertise. Another key piece to why teacher librarians are important is to offer equitable access to everyone, especially those things that are the quality and the culturally relevant resources. No school site or school district is a monolith. Their communities are different, they vary, and it's important that you have a teacher on campus, on site, in a district that's able to respond to not only the divergent needs of the community from social, economic, to gender, et cetera, but also in terms of cultural background. We need to make sure those cultural backgrounds are honored. And then finally, collaborators with fellow teachers and educators in pursuit of student learning. The key there is the classroom teacher, the content teacher, has to drill into the required learning of that classroom, required learning of that content, but we're partnering with teacher librarian brings the opportunity to bridge the personal interest and the personal relevance inside of each education student's soul to what's going on in that specific classroom. So for example, a student may be wildly interested in the boy band One Direction. Now, a teacher librarian will help to bridge that to their calculus class and see how those two are relevant with each other. Really powerful stuff. Another thing to understand is that we focus on, teacher librarians focus on student achievement and instruction, especially in the area of information literacy. There have been a few new bills that have just come up, and this year, within 2017, has come up about concerns about fake news, concerns about plagiarism, concerned about citations. All of those areas are the teacher librarian's wheelhouse, and it is their training. Also, learning environments. We've heard so much about maker spaces, so much about STEM and providing environments for kids to go in and tinker and make and create. But many times we're not connecting that making or creating to research that goes with that. And if you've done any perusing of any of the standards, all of our Common Core standards, NGSS, even the new social science, history social science standards, every one of those standards in every one of those content areas is calling for students to be skilled researchers, and that is a skill set that the teacher librarians bring to the table. And then, of course, the library team, which includes not only a teacher librarian, but also what many people identify as the librarian, which is a classified library clerk that is essential to the library, but is not a teacher. So many of our districts, when they hear the word librarian, they instantly go to that person that is doing that essential work as a clerk, as a classified individual in the library, but that is not a teacher librarian because that person is not a teacher. And remember, a teacher librarian's primary directive is instruction. Also, for those of you who are familiar with Future Ready, this is a big deal in our country right now. Most of the states have signed on to being Future Ready, and Future Ready has just come up with a 21st century definition of what teacher librarians do. And what I love about this particular graphic is it really puts our content area in the middle. And many people don't think of teacher librarians having a content area. But if there was a content area that we had, it's not science per se that we support science. It's not ELA that we support ELA. It's the personalized learning of the student. What does the student care about? And that's so critically important. And this speaks to relevance. So this might be something for another time for you to drill into. You can find it at the Future Ready website and under Future Ready Librarians. And then also, for those of you who are familiar with the P21 framework, when you hear people say the language, we need to have 21st century skills. And this is the type of language we hear quite a bit. P21 helped define what that actually means. What are those 21st century skills? And what's really powerful about P21's framework is you'll see right there in that blue section, information, media, and technology skills. As you drill into that, you'll see information literacy is the essential part of that. In fact, you could actually see in the ELD-ELA framework for California a call for the implementation of both the CTE framework standards, which you would find over in the red section, life and career skills, and the model school library standards, which you can find in that blue section. And then finally, how do those standards break down? So the model school library standards break down in a very simplistic way. Even though it's an extremely complex subject matter, it breaks down into the vowels, A, E, I, O, U. You know, it's funny, we've been saying we have to teach the 3 R's, read and write and arithmetic. I don't think we've even spelled it properly, which is really kind of funny. But we really need the vowels. And the overarching standards that the teacher librarians bring to the table is to teach kids how to access information, primarily through helping them formulate questions, evaluate those resources, which is now an absolutely essential skill for all of our students. The integration of knowledge. This is the idea of putting those divergent connections together, like how does social studies support ELA, how does ELA and math support my deep interest in dinosaurs. You would think, what is that? How do we integrate the personal interest of the student into the required learning at the school day? The O, even though it's not called out in the strands, but it is embedded in many of the standards, is this idea of students needing to understand the copyright, fair use, understand the consequences of plagiarism, making sure they're giving citations, the use of Creative Commons. That falls under the O. And then finally, safe, ethical, and legal use of information. All the cyber safety stuff. California actually has standards about when we should teach a particular idea to what grade level about safety online. So we actually have standards that directly address online safety in our state, and it's right here in the wheelhouse of the teacher librarians.
All right, thank you, Glenn.
Glenn, so before we get started with the next section, does anybody have any questions directly related to any of the information that Glenn just shared? We'll just give you a couple seconds. Okay, So we will go ahead and move on.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. Glenn touched upon this, but we're going to look a little bit more closely at certificated and classified and defining more the difference between the two individuals working in the library. So first, I would like you to, I want you to put a vision in your mind, and I want you to think back to either back to the days when you were in school, or think about your child's current experience. And I want you to think about visiting the school library. And once you have that image in your mind, I want you to think about the person that staffed the library. And when you think about the person, what did you call the person working in the library? And instinctively, most of us call that person librarian. And in California, that term has been bestowed upon anyone working in the library, from a volunteer to a classified library staff with a variety of competencies to teacher librarians. And the overuse or random use of the term librarian leads to confusion because it implies a level of knowledge and training that staff may or may not possess. And when I'm working with the field on the annual school library survey, this is one of the main sources of confusion and misunderstanding, especially when it's coupled with the variety of titles districts assign to library staff. A certificated teacher librarian possesses a valid California Library Media Teacher Services credential issued by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and you will hear more about that when we hear from CTC. Even though classified staff are not reported in CalPads, it is important to understand and recognize the differences and avoid misreporting. We have heard about teacher librarians and what they do, and let's quickly consider classified library staff. Some districts require their classified staff, let me go back, library staff to have training in running the library, while most districts require no training. In 2004, the California School Library Association wrote model job descriptions for library staff, including a model library technician job description, paraprofessional, and a model library clerk job description, also paraprofessional. The library clerk, and titles vary by district, provides clerical assistance in running the library. That includes shelving, circulating, distributing and processing books, book vending and repair, preparing purchase orders, reading to students, and a variety of other activities. Their services do not include those activities requiring a valid California Library Media Teacher Services credential. The library technician, also the title varies by district, is the second level in the school library paraprofessional career ladder and requires a library technician certificate or experience in library technical services such as cataloging, location and distribution of materials, and development of bibliographies. Once again, their services do not include those activities requiring a valid California Library Media Teacher Services credential. I want to emphasize when I'm talking to the field about strong library programs, I'm talking about a team. That is a team of a teacher librarian plus a classified library paraprofessional. That is the ideal, and few schools in California have this partnership, and this partnership is how all those things that Glenn talked about previously happen.
You know, what it reminds me of, Renee, this is Glenn again, that, you know, in a school office, there's a principal and the office manager. And one thing I think any of us have been at a school site knows that you cannot possibly run the school without the office manager. You know, in fact, when the principal goes off campus, that office manager can carry the day, potentially. But I can tell you right now, that principal will be the first person to tell you they can't do their job without their office manager. Similarly, it's the same way with a teacher librarian and a classified person in the library. You have to have that team to make it work. And one last thing before we move on, it's so important to understand that the role of school library services is first focused on the student. And, you know, so much of our work is around standards and all the things that we have to teach. But to be able to also bridge the distance between to the individual student to make sure that, for example, that first grader who's just now beginning to fall in love with reading, to make sure that they get that book that they love. or that kid in 6th grade who's now may have an interest in a surgical career. And last time I checked, I don't think we have surgery as an elective for 6th graders. I don't think that's there, but the kid may have an interest in surgery in 6th grade, and that teacher librarian can make sure that those kids are getting those resources that support their own personal passions and loves, as well as making sure that the required learning takes place, and that takes a team to do.
Okay, so we have a few questions. The first question is every school expected to have a teacher librarian? Is it a requirement?
Cricket.
Renee is pondering the question.
It is an ed code. However, the ed code is
vague.
Yeah, vague is the way to put it.
The answer is going to be vague.
Right. That's why it took me a while to answer.
So what I can tell you is that for federal reporting purposes, the department has repeatedly received audit questions from the federal government, specifically relating to districts who do not have any certificated teacher librarian staff. So the feds are paying attention to it. I can tell you that.
I think in fairness to answer the question directly, I think as it stands, based on practice and punishment. If we look at practice and punishment as a standard, then it would not be required. Right. But that doesn't mean that we aren't touching on things that are either unethical, potentially in terms of like issues of equity, where the Office of Civil Rights has gotten involved, and there's instances of that in our state, to the point of also the issue of just is this the right thing to do, kind of thing. So right now, that's the best answer we can give you right now. I would say ultimately, if you turn to your attorney, your law firm, they would tell you it's not required. But we are the tide is shifting, and I think it's important for us to really not say is it legal, but is this what we need to give for kids?
And I want to add to that, there are options to. There are options, especially for our smaller districts, where hiring a teacher librarian is just not possible. There are options for you. You can partner with your county office of education if they have library services, or another option is to partner with neighboring districts to provide services. So that would be for teacher librarians of record.
And there's another option as well. And that is having the teacher librarian credential. Just to point out, when I got my teacher librarian credential, I ended up 4 years later, becoming the Orange County Teacher of the Year and semi-finalist for a State Teacher of the Year, because that training impacted my practice in the classroom so profoundly, it brought me to that level. So you may not have the capacity to hire that person, but obviously there's people on your staff, your teaching staff, who care deeply about kids and know that expertise is important, and they can pursue that credential even without necessarily being employed as a teacher librarian. It's the absence of the expertise that is disturbing.
And before we turn it over to CTC, I just wanted to add that CSLA, Glenn Warren, is in the process of bringing together a group of county and district level educators to look at this, to bring people together to talk about this.
That's right.
And how do we start providing services?
So we had a couple of specific credentialing questions, but because CTC is going to be addressing a lot of the credentialing requirements, I'll reserve those to the end of that section. But there was one other question about where they can find job descriptions for classified library staff.
I mentioned the California School Library Association developed standards. If you go to the CSLA website, you can access that document. It is no longer in print, but they do have that document on there, and that's where I pull the job descriptions from. That's just an example because every district writes their own job description, but it does give you an excellent place to start with.
Okay. Okay. So we will move on to the next section.
All right, thank you. So Erin and I will briefly be covering teacher librarian services credential authorizations, including adding the special class authorization, which can be added to the credential through the completion of additional coursework. Erin will go over this in greater detail in a little bit, and then we will also be going over the requirements to earn a teacher librarian credential or emergency librarian permit. Now, before we move on, it's important to note that teacher librarian regulations were amended in January of 2013 based upon recommendations made in 2011 by the Teacher Librarian Services Credential Advisory Panel. Okay, actually before we run down this list here, Renee was actually touching on this earlier, but it's important to note that teachers on special assignment or non-credentialed classified employees are very limited in what sort of library-related services they can perform. She went over some of them, but it's along the lines of they can only order materials for school and district libraries and shelf books and check materials in and out, stuff along those lines. So what is a teacher librarian authorized to do? Okay, well, we will just kind of run through this list relatively quickly. They can instruct students in accessing, evaluating, using, and integrating information and resources in the library program. They can plan and coordinate school library programs with the instructional programs of the school district through collaboration with teachers. They can select materials for school and district libraries. They may supervise classified personnel assigned school library duties. They can develop programs for and deliver staff development for school library services.
That's significant because, we hear so much about teachers moving into positions that provide professional development, but this credential uniquely calls out the role of providing professional development. Am I correct?
Yes, and that's actually part of the amended regulations that went into effect in 2013, so yes. So along with the staff development duties, they may also coordinate or supervise library programs at the school, district, or county level. They may plan and conduct a course of instruction for those pupils who assist in the operation of school libraries, and they may develop procedures for and management of the school and district libraries. So with those amended regulations, those are going into effect, every new teacher librarian services credential is going to be given this new authorization that includes all of this information in it, as well as teacher librarian services credentials that were earned prior to that 2013 date will be authorized for the same service, and then once they renew their credential, their authorization statement will be replaced with the new one. So they will be covered for all of this information. And so now we're looking at just a little rundown of the credential requirements here. So you have the basic skills requirement that everyone has to complete. Typically that's done through the CBEST here. If you're an out-of-state educator, the most common one you'll see is the Praxis PPST. They will need a bachelor's degree along with every other credential that requires a bachelor's degree. This will have to be earned at a regionally accredited institution. Valid prerequisite credential. Okay, this first and foremost has to be a program that was completed in California, and it has to have included student teaching unless the holder holds a clear full-time designated subjects teaching credential and they have the bachelor's degree and have satisfied the basic skills requirement. In addition, another requirement is the completion of a professional teacher librarian preparation program that could be in California or can be completed out of state as long as it was a comparable program. Now, something to note here with the basic skills requirement is if you are an out-of-state prepared educator and you come to California, if you don't have the basic skills requirement satisfied at that time, then you can apply for a one-year non-renewable teacher librarian services credential, and then in that year you satisfy the basic skills requirement and apply for the full one.
Yeah, and that would be applied for through an employing agency.
Yeah, perfect. And then you'll see the English learner authorization here. Now that it also came in with those amended regulations in 2013 that made it a requirement for everyone applying for the teacher librarian services credential to hold a valid English learner authorization. So either that'll be the CLAD, an English learner authorization earned through a teacher preparation program. This will not be something that's listed on a teaching permit, intern credential, or variable term waiver.
Okay. So this is Erin Skubel here. Nice to be with you all today. If you were wondering why the voice changed. So I'm going to cover the next few slides, starting with the Teacher Librarian Credential Special Class Authorization. So the updated regulations that occurred in 2013 also added this option for individuals who are completing a teacher librarian program to also earn a special teaching authorization, and we call that the special class authorization. So this special class authorization allows the holder to teach specific courses, either departmentalized courses in information literacy, digital literacy, and digital citizenship to students who are in grades preschool, K through 12, or in classes organized primarily for adults. The intent of this is to provide more flexibility in employment for the holder as both a provider of services and as a teacher of related content in a departmentalized setting. So this authorization can be earned concurrently with a teacher librarian credential program. Program completers are not required to earn the special class authorization when they're completing their teacher librarian program. However, it is typically only one additional course that they have to take to earn this special class authorization, so it is actually not too difficult to complete this requirement. Holders of previously issued teacher librarian credentials who maybe have had the credential for quite a long time can also elect to complete the additional standards at a later date in order to add this special class authorization to their existing credential.
I'd like to add that I earned my the special class authorization, and it was excellent because I'd earned my library credential a few years before, and going through that program really helped improve my knowledge of technology and integrating technology and everything surrounding that.
Excellent. I like to hear those stories. Okay, so for the special class authorization, you might be wondering what are these courses that the special class authorization holder can teach. So the next few slides kind of provide the definition of what these courses would include. So starting with information literacy, this is going to be covering the knowledge of the nature, architecture, and cycle of information, the ability to access, evaluate, use, and integrate information and ideas found in print, media, and digital resources effectively, as well as enabling students to function in a knowledge-based economy and technologically oriented society. For digital literacy, that's going to cover a lifelong learning process of capacity building for using digital technology, communication tools, and networks in creating, accessing, analyzing, managing, integrating, evaluating, and communicating information in order to function in a knowledge-based economy and society. So you can really see how valuable these courses would be. And finally, digital citizenship would cover an understanding of the ethical, legal, and safe use of information and technology. It would cover respect for copyright, intellectual property, and the appropriate documentation of sources, including the ability to differentiate between legal and illegal uses of information and sources so that the student can learn to apply responsible research practices. It's going to also cover an awareness of local and global societal issues and responsibilities in an evolving digital culture, digital etiquette, and responsible social interactions related to the use of technology and information. So this is probably all sounding very familiar from what we previously presented. So what are the requirements for the special class authorization? Again, it's very straightforward, a valid prerequisite teacher librarian or library media services credential. This would also include previously issued equivalent credentials and completion of a commission-approved special class authorization program of professional preparation for teacher librarians. So again, the special class authorization requirements would be completed either concurrently with the teacher librarian program or after completion of a program, whether it's done recently or whether it was done a long time ago. Okay, so the last couple slides that we have for you on the credentialing requirements cover the emergency teacher librarian permit option. So we know that there can often be an immediate need to fill a teacher librarian position and you don't have an appropriately prepared individual available So this option would be specifically for that scenario. An employer can use this emergency teacher librarian permit to cover that assignment during that time. So it authorizes the same services as a full teacher librarian credential. And again, it would allow the qualified individual to be employed while completing their requirements for the related certification. They would have to show progress towards the goal of earning that full teacher librarian credential with each renewal. The validity period is 1 year, and it cannot exceed the expiration date of their prerequisite teaching credential. So they would have to maintain their prerequisite teaching credential while they are holding this emergency teacher librarian permit. And the service is going to be restricted to the employing agency, so they would not be able to work for, a different district. They can have more than one restriction if you have a teacher librarian situation where they maybe serve more than one school. So you can have more than one restriction listed, but, can't go crazy with it. So the requirements to earn that teacher librarian permit, the emergency teacher librarian permit, would include the basic skills requirement. So we know that was required for the full teacher librarian permit, so they have to have that up front. The bachelor's or higher degree, again, from a regionally accredited college or university. Also need to have that valid prerequisite teaching credential, and it's going to need to meet those same requirements that the full teacher librarian credential would have, just because the intent is for them to move on to that full credential. They need to provide written intent to complete the requirements. So again, they're providing their intent to complete that teacher librarian program. The application would need to be submitted by the employing agency, so an individual could not apply directly to the commission for this permit. And the employer would need to have a declaration of need on file with the commission. And if you don't know how to do that, you can find information on that process in the commission leaflet that covers this emergency permit, and that's leaflet CL-5330-LIB. So I think we can go ahead and move on to questions.
Okay. So the first question we had was, so if librarians are credentialed with a library media credential, do they qualify as teacher librarians?
Yes, so library media credential was the previous iteration of the teacher librarian credential. So when the regulations changed in 2013, they did change the title of the document.
Okay. And so Kay Peterson asked this question. And so Kay, the answer to your question is because they are considered teacher librarians, they would be included in the CalPADS collection for state reporting purposes, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The next question is, would a CTE credential cover the valid prerequisite teaching credential?
It's full-time and it has
so the
BA and basic skills met. And it's just a full-time designated subjects credential.
Right, so the CTE is, we no longer use the terminology part-time or full-time for the current designated subject, CTE, or adult education teaching credential. So it would satisfy the requirement as long as the individual held a bachelor's degree and had passed the basic skills.
Great. And actually this is probably directed more towards Glenn and Renee. So could you have one teacher librarian per district with classified librarians for each site for a district of 2,600 kids?
Yeah, you could. In fact, you do. And not only can you, and you do, you got districts that don't have any. So, yeah, I mean, that's a step in the right direction, for sure. At least you have somebody bringing those materials into the library. By the way, to be clear, people who bring in materials into the library, you have to have the expertise to authorize what those materials are. And oftentimes, if you don't have anybody in the district, you got to have some consultant to turn to.
Right. And I just want to add that, yes, that having 2,600 students for a teacher librarian, that before I came to the CDE, I was a teacher librarian serving 13 schools. And so, yes, that's common, and while it's not the ideal, it's certainly better than not having anyone.
Well, and it's also better than having the library closed. We're seeing the 21st century repurposing of school libraries to turn it into a STEM lab or a makerspace. The bottom line is you don't really have a restaurant unless you have a cook.
you've got to have the person in there. And I have a question about or statement about the special class authorization. You did a great job with that. You got I remember the bullet points. They're in my head. The information literacy bullet point, the digital literacy bullet point, and the digital citizenship point. Did I get it right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why those three things were called out for teacher librarians and over any other type of credential, over any single subject credential, CTE credential, multi-subject credential, the reason why CTE called those out is because those are directly related to the standards in which these folks are qualified to teach. Am I correct?
Yes, you are. Yes.
I love being right. I just love being right.
Gold star.
Thank you very much. And interestingly enough, I want to underscore that all of those are hot-button topics, not only in education, but for parents and for our nation right now.
Absolutely.
So we really need to underscore this with a sense of, value of why we're even having these conversations. So thank you for making sure I got that right.
Okay, so we have a few more questions. Would the CTE credential need to be California cleared before entering a TL program?
There's no requirement that the prerequisite teaching credential be a clear credential. So it does not, however, remember that they do need to maintain that prerequisite teaching credential. So, best practices might be to encourage them to clear their credential prior to completing the teacher librarian program, but no, it's not a requirement.
Okay. What authorization on the full-time designated subjects covers the teacher librarian?
There's not going to be an authorization on any of the prerequisite credentials that cover the librarian services. What the prerequisite credential does is it satisfies that requirement in order for them to earn the teacher librarian credential. It is a separate document. So they would be earning a completely separate document. There's no authorization listed on a designated subject or a CTE credential that would authorize the librarian services.
Okay. Where do I find information on getting that special class authorization? What universities offer this?
You can go to the Commission's homepage and take a look at the approved programs link that's up at the top of the page. That's going to take you to our approved programs dashboard, and you're just going to filter that list by the teacher librarian credentials. And, I'm not sure if it specifically lists out the special class authorization. I don't believe it does. You'd have to contact those universities that offer that program to find out if they offer that specific special class authorization, but I think most of them do.
I think they do.
Yeah.
So we have a request to go back to the slide before the emergency TL permit requirements, teacher librarian requirements.
That one or back?
Before. Okay, yeah. And once again, folks, we are going to be forwarding this PowerPoint presentation to all of the attendees once the presentation has concluded, so you will all receive this information.
Yeah, and let me just add that if you want another resource to obtain information on this special class authorization, you can go to the Commission's leaflet. It's in the same leaflet that the full teacher librarian services credential requirements, that same leaflet, and that's going to be CL 562. So if you just go to the Commission's website, www.ctc.ca.gov, there's a search bar in the upper right-hand corner of the page. Just type in CL-562, and that'll be the first result that comes up in the search results. It's a PDF document, just like all of our leaflets are at this time, and it does have the information on the special class authorization in that leaflet.
So we're getting questions about whether or not you'll receive the recording. We are going to be transcribing this as well as posting it on a centralized location. As soon as that's done, we will let all the attendees know where to find the information. So if you have staff that you wanted to attend but were not able to, this will be available probably within 2 to 3 weeks of today's date. They're asking for the website address again.
Sure. www.ctc, like cat, Tom, cat, .ca, as in California, .gov, as in government.
Okay. According to our credentialing specialists in HR, none of the 4 librarians currently employed in our district have the credential. Can they still be reported in CalPADS as teacher librarians, or will they have to complete this certification? So the answer to that question is that if they do not meet the credentialing requirements that are required of teacher librarians, they should not be reported in CalPADS. They are considered classified positions at that point. Correct, Renee?
A regular teacher. Or it could be a regular teacher.
Right. But they would not have they would not submit an assignment for teacher librarian.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
But they could be a teacher who's being paid as a teacher to work in the library. But you're correct. They would not report them as a teacher librarian.
Right.
But I will say, you need to pay attention to what services they're providing, because if they're providing any of those services beyond what the classified staff is allowed to do, which is the order materials for the school and district libraries, or shelf books, filing, checking in and out of materials, if they're doing anything beyond that, then that is going to be a misassignment, and it would need to be reported as such. So if they are doing anything beyond those duties, you're going to want to get them on that emergency teacher librarian permit as soon as possible.
And again, I think it's important to underscore where the massive confusion does reside, and that is, hey, we've got a great librarian clerk in there. They do great work. By the way, I got to tell you, most of the library aides and clerks in the state are heroes, really. They are champions. But they are really stretching it on terms of what they do. And a principal may look at them and go, you would make a great teacher librarian. Please stop and think again. It's a teacher librarian. It starts as a teacher. It's easy to go from teacher to teacher librarian. It's very difficult to go from non-teacher to teacher librarian. Very difficult. So, in fact, there's an easy pathway for a teacher.
Absolutely.
Because if a teacher was in the library or doing these types of work or providing this type of thing, said, hey, I need that emergency permit, the agency, the LEA that they're working for, the district they're working for, say, we want them, and the commission would go, bippity boppity boo, you've got yourself an emergency credential.
Absolutely.
Am I right?
Yes. Basically.
I'm not sure about the bippity boppity.
So we've got a question. Will the special class authorization be a requirement for current teacher librarians who hold a library media services credential?
No, it's not a requirement. And again, it would be at their discretion whether they want to complete that additional option within the teacher librarian program. So it's not a requirement. It would only be required if they are teaching one of those specific courses in a departmentalized setting. Then whoever is teaching any of those courses would need to hold that special class authorization, because those aren't courses that are authorized by a single subject teaching credential.
Okay. So there was follow-up on this.
In any other area.
Exactly.
I think it's important to underscore. Those areas, digital literacy, digital citizenship, and information literacy, are not covered by any other credentials. The only credential that remotely comes close to authorizing to teaching those key areas is this credential.
Exactly.
Okay, so a follow-up on one of the previous questions was, but these 4 librarians do have library media credentials and teacher credentials. So are they only reported as teachers this year until they get the additional credentials? And what I'm hearing based on that is they have the additional.
So the library media credential issued by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing is just the same. It's the previous version of the teacher librarian credential that currently exists.
It carried over.
Yes. So when those regulation changes took place in 2013, we just changed the title of the document. And as Hart had said earlier, anybody who held that previously issued credential, when the library media credential, when they renew that document, the title will stay the same, but the authorization statement on that document will be updated to include all the same options that the current teacher librarian credential offers.
Okay, we have a librarian with an MLIS, Master in Library Sciences, I'm assuming, but no teaching credential. What would be the best way for them to get fully certified?
The best thing for them
is where I was talking about
get the emergency permit ASAP if they're providing those services, and have them contact She doesn't have a teaching credential?
No, she does not have a, they don't have a teaching credential.
This is what I was talking about earlier.
No teaching credential.
Right.
Yeah.
Teacher librarian, it's very difficult to go.
Yes.
It's easy to go from teacher to teacher librarian. Not from
what Hart was just saying is have them explore the CTE credential, see if they can obtain that based on their experience, and then get them on that emergency permit. And, you know, they may want to take that Master's in Library Science master's program to an approved teacher preparation program for the teacher librarian services credential to see if any of that coursework would cover the requirements for the program. But again, get that CTE credential first.
Let me help with that part. Under the CTE, gosh, so many letters. Under the career technical education piece, what sector would make sense for somebody who came out of an MLIS? It would definitely, well, let me rephrase that because you're the experts. I would guess that it would fall under the information communication technology sector, the ICT sector.
Yeah.
It's teeming, beaming with that area of expertise. So if you had a full-time librarian in a public library doing that work,
absolutely,
it would just be a direct step over to the ICT sector.
And they can obtain that preliminary CTE credential just by verifying their specific number of years of work experience. So they don't need to complete a preliminary program prior to earning that credential. It's just based on their experience. So it should be, if they have been working in that field for a while, it should be pretty straightforward.
Like about 2,000 hours, I think, in that particular area.
200, yeah.
How much?
Okay, so Josie, I hope that answered your question. Okay. Yeah, looks like we're good.
Great questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent question.
Okay, I have a teaching credential and a library credential, but my job title is Library Media Specialist. How should I be reported? I would say teacher librarian. Teacher librarian. Because you have the, if you're actually in that assignment, you should be reported as a teacher librarian, and we're going to tell you how to do that in just a few seconds.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on. So once again, my name is Brandy Howdege. I'm one of the Senior Information Systems Analysts here with the CalPADS project. And so one of the reasons that we actually did this, and Renee alluded to it, was because of some data discrepancies that we found last year when we changed the method of reporting. So I kind of wanted to go through how these teacher librarians were historically reported and some of the issues with that, and then talk about how we're doing it now and what the expectation is in CalPADS. So historically, teacher librarians were reported in the CBEDS data system, so the California Basic Educational Data System, on the Professional Assignment Information Form, or what they call the PAIF. And for a long time, it was a paper form, and districts gave this paper form out to all of their certificated staff, and they were expected to complete all of their assignments on this form, and eventually it moved to a web-based platform. And teacher librarians were actually reported in the pupil service assignment job classification rather than teaching classification. They were student support assignments, and they were reported with CBEDS code 0204, library media teacher. And so that's where all of these folks would show up. And that was up until 2010-11 when we moved all of the certificated staff reporting into CalPADS. So now what we're doing is kind of moving with the trends of how these people actually want to be reported. So we collect these individuals as a teaching assignment in CalPADS, which means that they have to have a teaching job classification, and they can be reported in the manner in which they actually deliver their services. So if they're delivering those services in a pull-out form, which means that the students actually leave their classroom and then they go to the library and receive instructional services, then that's a pull-out form. And they can also be reported in a classroom-based environment. And we're going to talk about how that's done. So in order to do that, a course section in CalPADS has to be reported for these teacher librarians. So not only do they have to be identified in the teacher job classification, but you have to go one step further and you have to report a course for these teachers. And it doesn't matter whether it's in a pull-out setting or it's in a classroom-based setting. You would use state course code 6026 which is Teacher Librarian. It was a new course code that we created in 2015-16. So fall of 2015 was the first time that you guys actually reported this. And it is a course that represents information and digital literacy and digital citizenship. So all of the content areas that the CTC staff define, they're all encompassed in this one course code. So if your teacher librarians are delivering any of those areas of content, this is the state course code you would use. But again, you have to report a course for these individuals because they are teachers. Okay, so why did we make these changes? Again, we want to change with the trends. This requires a teaching credential in addition to a library services credential. And they should be recognized as teachers because they are teachers. They're providing instruction to students. The other thing is, based on questions that we're getting right now, there's a lot of indications that people were being reported as teacher librarians when they actually were not, they don't have the appropriate credentials. So we made this change to try and give some clarity to that. And this webinar is a direct result of a lot of confusion, right? Because we know that a lot of the data were misreported in 15-16. Okay, so let's talk about current data.
Hold on a second. We had
questions.
Some questions. The first one is from Victoria, and you may have addressed this already. They were requesting that we put the answers on the screen in writing instead of responding with answered verbally. And I think the answers will show up in the transcript when you get the transcript.
Right. Yes. So, and we apologize because just because we're getting lots of questions, it's not always possible to type everything that the presenter is saying in the answer box. So I apologize for that, Victoria.
Hey, and this is Martha. We may be able to take some of these questions and put them into an FAQ.
Smart.
Oh, yes.
That's
that would
a good
be
idea.
Yeah.
Right. That will be posted on the CalPADS FAQ site.
Beautiful.
Anything else?
There's another one. Is this a question about, is that why teacher librarians are considered other teaching staff for school site councils? Because they used to be under pupil services area.
Yes.
And I think the next ones you're going to cover because you're going to get into reporting. So
Okay.
I'll save those for later.
All right. So let's talk about the current data. So in 2015-16, and again, Renee alluded to this earlier. So we had, in 14-15, we had 859 teacher librarians, or the way they were reported under the pupil services job classification, we had 859 reported statewide, okay? In 2015-16, there were only 152 people, which was like an 82% drop statewide. So either there was a lot of districts reporting incorrectly previously, or people just didn't really understand the changes we made in the data collection. So out of 201 districts that previously reported teacher librarians, 171 of those districts told us they had zero, none. So the likelihood of that, I'm hoping
too,
is not good. So we think it's reporting errors. So 6 districts reported increases in teacher librarians, and then 18 reported absolutely no change. So, as you can see, the data are very, very different from 14-15 to 15-16. In addition, there was an audit conducted by the California State Auditor's Office.
Yeah, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee.
Right. Which had the department provide a lot of this data, and of course they had a lot of concerns about the way we're reporting. So one of the findings of that audit is that the entities, California School Libraries Association, CTC, CDE, actually provide information to users on how to appropriately report these data, which is why we're doing
this webinar.
Yes, exactly.
How about that?
Who knew?
So this was a good idea.
Great. Okay, so again, most likely causes for the decrease was a lack of understanding in how we changed the reporting from a pupil services job classification to a teacher job classification. But then the other thing is we want to make sure that you're reporting the right individuals in this classification because it's going to give us some insight on where districts need support in order to get their teachers library media services credentials, or teacher librarian credentials. Okay, any questions?
There are quite a few questions, but I think
specifically related to
yes.
reporting. Okay, so let's talk about how we specifically you should report these in CalPADS. And a lot of those of you who are librarian staff, this section is directly targeted at the CalPADS administrators because they're the ones that actually deal with getting these data into CalPADS. It's really important that you understand it as well, but if you don't understand a lot of the terminology that I'm using, please talk to your CalPADS administrators, become their best friend, because they wear a lot of hats these days, and they can provide a lot of insight. Okay, so who should you report? So the folks from CTC were gracious enough to provide us with all of the credentialing and authorization requirements for these individuals. So those are the individuals we want you to report as teacher librarians. One question I did have for Renee was, and are we talking about those that receive the emergency teacher librarian permit?
Yes.
We want those okay. So those individuals should also be reported as teacher librarians if they've met all of the requirements for the emergency permit.
I had a question also about if the teacher librarian is at the district level, that would count as a teacher librarian, correct?
You addressed that in your, I know you're going to address that.
Oh, I jumped ahead?
Yes, you jumped ahead.
I apologize. Sorry.
Okay, the other thing that's really important about reporting a teacher librarian in CalPADS is they actually have to, even if you have a library services credential and you have a teaching credential, so you meet all the credentialing requirements, but you're not actually in that assignment in your school, you should not be reported as a teacher librarian, because what we're not collecting individuals that have met the credentialing requirements. We want to know people that are actually serving in that capacity within districts and schools.
And I would just like to add to that, because there are times, when I was going through the credentialing program, the library credentialing program, one of my classmates, even though she had her teaching credential and her library credential, she accepted a classified position to get her foot in the door, thinking that eventually it would lead to a certificated position. So in that case, even though she had all those credentials, she would be reported. She's considered classified and would not be reported as certificated.
Correct. They have to be serving in a certificated capacity at the district or school. Okay. So how do we want these folks reported? And this is a point of a lot of confusion in LEA, okay? Because just as some of you referenced, you don't have the resources to provide a teacher librarian at every single school within your district, okay? So we have districts that have one teacher librarian and then they have classified employees at each of the sites. But if, in fact, that teacher librarian provides instructional services to students at multiple sites, what the department would prefer that you do is actually report an FTE and a course record for that teacher librarian at each school they provide instructional services at. Okay, that's the way we would prefer that you do it. Those of you that do CalPADS reporting know that it's very laborious because not only do you have to provide a course record saying that this individual teaches at all of these places, but you have to provide staff demographic information. You have to provide staff assignment information, which you may not always have access to because you don't have access to the HR system at the district, right? So we would prefer that you do it that way. However, if you cannot do it that way, you can still report that those courses are being offered to students within your school by providing a course record, but indicating that the statewide educator ID or a SEED is a generic number of all nines, which basically says we have a person teaching this, but we don't own that teacher. The district owns that teacher. That's basically what that's saying. So there are two methods. Obviously, the portion highlighted in blue tells you the preferred method. We would really like to know where these individuals are providing instruction at a school level, if you can do it. Okay, so CSIS, California School Information Services staff was gracious enough to put together this slide, which is a good representation of exactly how these staff should be reported within your districts. And I did make a couple of modifications. I wanted to let Martha know.
That's okay.
On this live broadcast.
You're the subject matter expert.
So, again, if you're a teacher librarian, it tells you the description of the duties or that you have at that district. the credential that's required, and obviously you should refer to the credentialing section for the correct terminology. But you would use a staff job classification of 12, which is teacher. You would not have to report a non-classroom-based job assignment code. And then the state course code, because all teachers have to have a course, an associated course, would be 6026, which is the teacher librarian code.
And then we need student enrollment.
Right. Okay. So if you are in a classroom-based setting, so you're actually teaching your course in a classroom-based setting and it's in the master schedule, then CalPADS is actually going to require that you tell us the students that are enrolled in that class. Okay, so that's the difference between reporting a pull-out course and a classroom-based course. So a pull-out course in CalPADS doesn't actually require that you submit student enrollment, okay, which is the next line. So a teacher librarian pull-out, it tells you, or you're required to tell us that the teacher is teaching the course, but because it's in a pull-out setting and it doesn't exist in the master schedule necessarily, you don't have to tell us the students that are enrolled in that course. So you can report the course either way, in a pull-out setting or classroom-based setting. You'll notice that for the pull-out setting, the staff job classification is 27, okay? So 27 is, it's a teacher job classification, but it specifically identifies itinerant or pull-out, push-in classroom scenarios. Okay, so the next is push-in. You use the same job classification, 27, which is itinerant, pull-out, push-in. And then again, you would report a course. You are not required to submit student enrollments in CalPADS associated with that course. Okay, so if you have an administrator, we do have a course code for a library media services administrator, but you would report them with a job classification of administrator. They are not teachers. And in fact, unless they actually have the library media credential or the teacher librarian credential, they cannot provide instruction to students, okay? So they should be reported as an administrator, not a teacher. And you would use a non-classroom-based job assignment code of 0139, okay? You would not report a course for these individuals because obviously they're administrators. And then any library supervisors or library assistants that are in classified positions, you will never report those individuals in CalPADS. They are reported in CBEDS, which is California Basic Educational Data System, on the school information form or the district information form as classified staff. So do not report them in CalPADS. Okay, so just a couple of considerations. We talked about administrators. So if the individual is solely the administrator over the teacher librarian staff, they would use the job classification code of 10. You would report a non-classroom-based or support assignment code for them. Requires an administrative services credential, but they cannot provide instruction to students as an administrator.
And can I add in there, not only can they not provide instruction, but they cannot provide any of those library-related services such as selecting the materials for the school and district libraries. They can order materials, and they can do the shelving of books, the filing and the checking in and out of materials, but they would not be able to provide those additional library services.
Okay. So if the individual is an administrator and they also provide services, there is an opportunity for you to actually report both of those assignments in CalPADS.
Well, thank goodness.
Yeah, so that you don't have to choose. If the person actually does have the teacher librarian credential and an administrative services credential and a teaching credential, right, they would be able to be reported by specific FTE, full-time equivalency, by job classification as a teacher and as an administrator. So you can submit both of those assignments.
Terrific. And that's pretty common. That is out there quite a bit.
Right. Okay, so Renee, did you want to talk a little bit about identifying information literacy courses or
absolutely.
Glenn?
Yeah, information literacy courses, for example, when we, let's hit the bullet points first, taught discretely and or integrated into collaboratively taught projects, and also a course that would set curriculum and teacher librarians and teacher record. The ideal situation is in collaboration with content, because we're in an age right now where we're trying to de-silo the content areas. So that, well, I don't do math. I'm not a math person. And of course, they're, using incredible angles on their drawing and not realizing they're a math genius. Or they play piano and they're reading these things called notes, and they're eighth notes. I hate to tell you, it's math. Anyway, the point being is there's this need for integration between different content areas, and this is why it's so important for a teacher librarian who's basically the horizontal teacher to bring these vertical content areas together. However, there is also emerging this desire for students to be able to drill into things that matter to them personally. And this is where information literacy courses become really powerful, where you have now, in fact, I taught this class, believe it or not. We had a class where it was an elective class, and the students came in and they asked, well, what do I learn in this class? And the answer was, I don't know, you tell me. And the students got to choose anything they wanted to learn, but they were graded on how they learned. And that was connected directly to the Model School Library Standards. It was amazing. And this is also showing up, like, for example, in collaboration potentially with, like, makerspaces, where kids are coming in and making things and creating things, but they need to do research behind what they're creating. So, again, having a course that maybe drills into the student's own personal passion, that could be a standalone course. But wait a minute, there's more. What about districts are now having one-to-one iPads or one-to-one Chromebooks or one-to-one, God knows what the next thing's going to be. The point being is with all this technology in the hands of the students, parents and administrators and teachers are concerned, hey, we need to teach those kids specifically digital citizenship classes. Like, how do I stay safe online? This is real stuff. Like, for example, great content for this would be like Common Sense Media has great content. iKeepSafe has some good content. But having good content doesn't mean you have a good teacher connected to that content. And right now it's kind of the Wild West out there. Anybody, pew pew, pew pew pew. That's me. That's with me shooting in the air like.
Yeah, you just can't see the gun.
You can't see me going up and he's sending me Sam things. You got people say, well, you teach that class. Well, this is make the CTC turn over in their, they get loose sleep. They don't want to hear this because that's not compliant at all. So if you are going to have like a digital citizenship class with a teacher teaching that class, or an information literacy class, or digital literacy class, this is where these considerations become very important. In fact, we even have people right now that are potentially leading this area, have teacher librarians in their district, and those teacher librarians have nothing to do with this content. And that's why this webinar is so critically important, because that disconnect is there. And we're tapping into not only the right expertise, but the recognized and official expertise. So I think I belabored that too much.
And I just wanted to point out that, the intent of this webinar is to actually get you to report correctly.
Yes.
So if after we go through this 16-17 collection and the numbers haven't increased any, at least we would think, we're hoping that's not correct, but what we would expect to see, if in fact you haven't been reporting your teacher librarians and CalPads, that you've actually been reporting them correctly as classified staff in CBEDS. And so we would expect to see an increase in the number of classified staff, and then that just gives us a strategy for how we're going to approach, getting the resources available by advocacy organizations and, of course, the department.
And by legislation, because remember, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee called for the data. And it was very difficult to get them data on this that answered their questions. And so this is on the radar. It will continue to be on the radar, and reporting correctly is going to become an increasingly important piece.
And Brenda, I'm going to ask you to do the next few sections pretty quickly because we have a whole bunch of questions.
Okay. So when you're reviewing your data before you submit it in CalPads, what you want to do to validate your teacher librarian count specifically is you want to use CalPads Snapshot Report, and this is also available as an ODS or Operational Data Store report if you would like to look at it. But you should use Report 4.3, which is staff detail. Okay, so this gives you all of the information about all of your teachers and every single course that they're teaching. You can filter the report by state course code 6026, so you can look at this specific course code and see all of the teachers that you've identified in your district as having taught this, as teaching this course. So here is a look at the actual report. So this is what it looks like in CalPads, and obviously we've masked the teacher names. But if you use this filter here, 6026, for your district, it's going to tell you every single teacher librarian that you have reported in CalPads, and it'll tell you, all of the other relevant information about this staff person and the course specifically. Okay, so again, it's report 4.3, staff teaching assignment detail. So make sure you validate those counts using this report before you hit the certify button, because unfortunately, currently in CalPads, there is not another report available that will group these individuals into that classification. You're not going to be able to see them overtly in any other aggregate report. So you want to pay attention to 4.3.
The detail.
Right, yes, the detail. Okay, so lots of questions.
Yes. Okay, so the first question comes from Ventura County Office of Education, and their question is, how should this be reported if you have one teacher librarian in a district who is overseeing and training at various LEAs but not providing services directly to students?
Those individuals should be reported at your district office. So you would not see an FTE for that individual at each site because they're not actually providing instruction to students, but they would be reported, you would actually report a course at the district level. And because you're reporting that course at the district level, you're not required to attach students to the course.
But would you use 6026?
Yes.
Because they're helping other staff.
Yes. That's how they would report it, because they're teacher librarians.
Okay.
All right. We have one credentialed teacher librarian for a district of 16,000. They manage the classified library text at each of the 25 school sites, but she does not have student-level interaction. Would she still be reported as a teacher librarian? And the question is no section code attached to it.
And actually, I understand what Martha's saying, so there's a disconnect. So there are these district-level staff who actually aren't providing the instruction. So they are teacher librarians, and they're fulfilling probably the book ordering, and they're doing all of that for the districts, but they're not actually providing one-on-one instruction.
But they might be providing the professional development.
Right.
Correct.
Where they indirectly are.
Yeah. Right. What I would say is, because you want, right now we're looking to get a count of teacher librarians that are providing teacher librarian services. And if those individuals exist at the district level, I would still report the course records for them, because that's the only way we can identify them right now. That's the only way.
Mm.
So not as a pull-out, but if you do it at the district level, you don't have to give us course enrollment?
That's correct.
Okay.
But you could report it as an itinerant teacher librarian.
Oh,
You could do
definitely. That would definitely fit. Because
Right.
I don't know one that isn't itinerant.
Right. But again, right now, in CalPads, because you do have a teacher librarian, they are providing those teacher librarian services, maybe not the specific content to each set of students, but we want to at least reflect that there's at least one individual in the district that does.
Right. Good.
Okay. In other words, we have to create a course with state course code 6026, even though there's no student assigned to it.
Yes.
Sounds right.
But you have to use the
itinerant code, job class 27. Job classification 27, which is itinerant pull-in, push-out.
If you use job class 10 as a teacher, then you got to give us students.
Job class 12.
It feels
Yeah,
fun when you
right.
do that.
And that's Martha Friedrich.
Job classification 12.
12.
Right. Love those
Then we have to have student enrollment.
Right.
Student
And without student enrollment is job classification.
You'll get an error and it won't be allowed.
Right.
That's right.
You won't be able to certify your data because the expectation is if you're in a classroom-based environment, it's a scheduled course, and CalPads is expecting you to attach students. But if you tell us that the teacher is an itinerant pull-out, push-in teacher, we don't expect students attached to that.
We'll take them,
Right.
but it's not required.
It's not required.
Because of this law change, should TLs, or teacher librarians, now be considered teachers within school site councils?
I don't know how to
That's not a CalPAD question.
Right.
That is,
Well,
yeah.
I have a visceral response to that question. Teacher librarians, CTC's here. I can find out if I'm right. Teacher librarians are teachers, yes?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so, yes, the answer is yes.
By de facto,
Yeah, I mean,
they're part of the council.
it's sort of like saying, is my brain surgeon a doctor? Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, your brain surgeon's a doctor. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And I think we've answered this already, but let me see here. This person says they're brand new to CalPADS. If you are reporting a teacher librarian and assign the 6026 course section to them, does this mean that students must be assigned to this course as well?
Yes, if they're in a classroom-based setting.
Right.
So if they're,
Said they were a teacher.
right, so they're a teacher, but they could be a pull-out teacher.
Yeah.
So there's,
Oh.
right,
Yeah.
so just, again, it depends on how they're delivering the instruction. If the kids are being pulled out of their regular class and they're going into the library to receive this instruction, then you would report them as 27, in which case, which is itinerant pull-out push-in, which means you don't have to attach students to that course section. And then if we don't answer your question specifically, please feel free to submit a CalPADS help ticket. So submit a service desk ticket, and we
Good
will
idea.
definitely get back to you on that. And then, of course, contact information is at the end of the slide.
I have a question. When you're saying that the direct classroom instruction for, I believe you said it was Code 10?
12.
Code 12. That's what,
Oh, man.
let's underscore that.
Would that specifically be when the teacher librarian is providing that departmentalized instruction in the digital literacy, digital sedition? Okay.
That's correct.
So that would be an individual who has that special class authorization when you would use that classroom instruction code?
Right.
Okay.
And so that is that the caveat, that they actually have to have that special
Absolutely.
class authorization?
Yeah, correct.
So the library services credential allows you to do book ordering and all of those other duties, but you actually have to have the special class authorization in order to teach in a departmentalized setting. Does everybody get that? I mean, that's real important.
You can teach that in the pull-out. They're coming into the library.
The push-in, pull-out services are appropriate for the teacher librarian without the special class authorization or the library media services credential. They can provide those services at the push-in, pull-out level, but the departmentalized classroom level needs to have that special class authorization.
Okay, so that's a huge, huge distinction, folks. So that means that you got to talk to your HR folks. You have to find out what this individual's credentials and authorizations are. So if they're teaching in a departmentalized setting and you report them as a teacher in a departmentalized setting with kids attached, they have to have that special class authorization. That's huge.
Right. Like we have a bridge for teacher librarians that are now going into the library and say, oh, okay, we'll get you that emergency credential, and that's a bridge for them to be able to get to them getting their credential. Do we have any such thing for special class? Because that can happen on the fly, just like the other.
So that is actually a really good question. I was thinking about that, and I was hoping you weren't asking me because I don't know the answer. I think that the emergency permit can be issued with the special class authorization. I think you can request that on the emergency permit. However, we do need to go back to the office and verify that.
That's good.
We're going to get through everybody's questions.
So we can provide that information if we put out an FAQ with these questions.
Yeah, I'm glad we covered it.
Yeah.
It's good that we're here.
Yeah.
But there's a couple that we should respond to. The next question, I assume that teacher librarians will be considered a teacher rather than pupil services on the R-2 employee ratio summary.
I'm not familiar with the R-2 employee ratio summary, so we'll have to check with you on that. We'll have to get back. Yeah, I would just definitely send in a CalPADS service ticket. If you're not a CalPADS administrator, work with your CalPADS administrator to get that question submitted, and we can find the answer for you, because I'm not familiar with that survey.
Very simple question. Who typically completes the reporting CalPADS?
Your CalPADS administrator
works with the HR.
Should work with the HR, should work with the person who's in charge of the master schedule to make sure that all these individuals are reported appropriately. But again, CalPATH administrators, their job is to get the data into the system cleanly, without any errors, okay? It's not their job to understand that there's supposed to be a teacher librarian reported there, right? The people who are responsible for that should be the curriculum and instruction folks, your associate superintendents, your human resources staff. They should know which staff should be reported as teacher librarians. So make sure that they review the reports prior to you certifying the data in CalPATH. Because once they hit the certify button, once the amendment window's over, you don't have an opportunity to correct it, and it gets posted on DataQuest and reported to the Fed.
And I can't imagine, in my imagination, that there are some HR leadership that probably would be well served to have viewed this webinar.
Correct.
Because there may be underscoring misunderstanding.
Right.
I think what lends itself to that is the idea that we dropped 82% in one year. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Very quickly, I want to get a couple more questions in here. If our teacher librarian is overseeing students working on an in an online class, do they still have to have a course with 6026? And currently, we are coding the course as 6098. Other instruction-related assignment. Is she still a teacher librarian or pupil services?
So I would say that it's dependent on the content. So if that student's actually taking, an online course that meets the description of 6026, it should be reported as 6026. If the person is only providing oversight, but they have a library services credential,
They're just not using the
Right.
library.
Right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
We have a principal who oversees our library media specialists across the district. Does that need to be reported?
So it sounds like they're an administrator.
Right, without a library credential.
So, yes, so they would need to be reported, but they would have to be reported as an administrator of library media services, which is in a non-classroom-based or support assignment. So, once we email the slides to you, there's that matrix, which clearly outlines where they should be reported. So it would be a non-classroom-based or support assignment. It's code 0139.
Here's another one. So they're saying, we have to create a course at each school site for library with a state code of 6026.
If, in fact, that's occurring at each school site, right? So if you're having that full-out instruction occur at each school site, or if you have individuals where it is actually a scheduled course and the individual meets that special class authorization requirement, then yes, we would prefer that you report it at a school level where it's occurring.
And that's for those individuals with the correct credential?
That's correct.
Okay. Please review district and course with all the nines. What about staff, which is by school?
Staff assignment?
Yes.
By school? Okay, so let me see if I can go back here.
Staff person with all nines don't show up on 4.3.
Right, but they're talking about the course. Okay, so, right. And so what you should know is if you decide to go ahead and report your teacher librarian at the district level as an itinerant teacher librarian, but then you want to reflect that the scheduled course is actually occurring in each school site, you can do that. But just keep in mind that if you're reporting a generic seed of all nines, basically all you're doing is reporting that the student took the course. That's all you're reporting.
Not getting credit for the teacher.
Exactly. You don't get credit for the teacher, but you get credit for the course, the delivery of the course. Okay, so that may be something that we'll also take a look at.
Yeah, that's good.
Schools that are providing the course, but very likely the teacher librarian is at the district and is being reported at the district level. So we are going to look at that. But just remember, when you use a generic seed of all nines in the course record, because you can't report a staff assignment or staff demographic record with all nines. You can't do that. But in the course record, it means the student is receiving the content, but there's no teacher information in that record.
It looks like we have come to the end of our time frame.
Right. So I know we didn't get to all of the questions, but what I will do for those of you that didn't get your questions answered, I'll try and stay on and answer your questions after this is over.
Nice.
Or otherwise, if we don't get an opportunity or you think of something later, please, again, work with your CalPath administrators to get a help ticket submitted through our service desk, and we will definitely answer the questions. Also, this is all of our contact information. So if you have specific questions for CTC or Glenn Warren or Renee Owsley Swank or myself or Martha Friedrich, here's all of our contact information. So what I would do is, at this point, I would hit the print screen button on your computer and save this. Print screen button. But we are going to send this PowerPoint to all of you once we receive the participant list. So please know that that's forthcoming. We'll go ahead and leave this slide up for a while. Does anybody else have anything to add before we conclude here?
This was terrific.
Yes. It was. So thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this. And again, I'll be happy to stay behind. For those of you that still have lingering questions that haven't been answered, I will try to take the opportunity to answer them even after the intercom has gone mute, and you won't be able to hear anything. But I will try and answer those questions.
And if you can't stay on, again, send in the service ticket or
Yep.
contact the people on the screen.
Right. Okay, folks, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank all of you.
Thanks.